Mr. President and members, I rise to kind of talk a little bit about, if you may indulge me, about a portion of Senator Pratt's bill. It's the equity articles. And so, Mr. Chair, or excuse me, Mr. President, Senator Pratt, I guess I'd like to say, number one, I am thank you for including the equity articles within your budget area. We know that in this state, we suffer from disparities that are frankly embarrassing. We are last in people of color, in particular in the African American community, at home ownership. We've worked on that and talked a lot about that when Senator Western came with his bill and did some moving and shuffling around programs that would target those communities to work on home ownership. We also know that our poverty rate is still very high in communities of color, in that our unemployment rate, though at historic lows for this state, are still relatively high for communities of color. And so we have the data that helps us to understand that in a state as great as us and a $1 billion surplus and a huge budget that's going to go north of $48 billion, depending upon how this thing ends up, we know that we can do better by communities of color. Mr. President, each and every day, or at least once or twice a month, I'm talking to someone that's in business, either a CEO or a senior manager, who continues to tell us that they are looking for skilled workers, that they have more jobs than they have workers, and that the problem is that they don't have the people with the right set of skills. Mr. President, we tried to address that. Senator Champion and I in 2016 were the co-authors, when we were in the majority, and I guess you could say the architects, with a lot of help from members of this body, of an equity bill that was in the supplemental budget that Senator Cohen had when he was the finance chair. And with that, we negotiated skillfully, and I will remind you, in 2016, we were in charge, Democrats of this body, but the GOP was in charge of the House, and we had a Democratic governor. So there was bipartisan support with this in both bodies, and there was $35 million committed to this issue of trying to target specifically the African American and Somali community. This is by data that we received from the census, the Survey USA, in particular American Indians, Latinos, and then disaggregated in the Asian community to the Hmong community. And those were the communities that we targeted geographically across the state to try to infuse some resources in which to help those communities get into the workforce. And we did that by doing a couple of things. One, we funded the adult basic education and boosted that up, and that was for people, as we know, that are adults that somehow didn't get a high school diploma, and we wanted to help them receive the high school diploma, because we know that that's the very base that you need in order to get into a training program or college or some post-secondary option. We also really focused on all across the state in corridors, main streets in Minneapolis and St. Paul, main streets throughout the state, to look at boosting economic development in the form of entrepreneurship in these communities. And then we really worked closely with organizations that had come forward, well over 55 bills or so. Senator Champion can correct me if, when his turn comes, along with governor's provisions that we looked at, took through the process, had hearings on each and every one of them, vetted them out, and came up with a series of groups that we made some direct appropriations in the form of investments to help them further their mission in order to give people the training that they need, that was focused on jobs in which people could start to pull themselves out of poverty. We spend a lot of time around here, members, talking about poverty. Tomorrow, we're going to spend a lot of time, I hope you guys are ready, an awful lot of time talking about the Health and Human Service budget, and a good portion of that are helping people who need help from the government because the work that they do can't support them. They can't pay for their own health care. They need help with early childhood education. They need help with supplemental food support, and even some of them need help just in straight financial assistance to make their way, to make their ends meet. This bill that Senator Champion and I, this provision was to really address that issue. So not only do we want people to live the Minnesota and American dream, but we also wanted to relieve the tension and the pressure from the HHS committee. There's another budget provision that we have is in community corrections. And in the community corrections budget, that's where people are having to make poor decisions and break the law in order to sometimes make ends meet because they didn't have the skills in which to work in this economy. We wanted to relieve the pressure there and either not make that decision, or when you are returning from places like St. Cloud and Stillwater and Moose Lake and other correctional facilities, you have an opportunity in order to move forward, get the skills that you need so that you don't return to the correctional facility and that you can rejoin your family and participate in this economy. Well, Mr. President, in this particular bill, chronologically, once again, in 2016, we were at 34 million. Mr. President, when you were the chair of the Jobs Committee, that got knocked down to 25 million, and now we're down to 15 million. Members, we're going the wrong way here. We need to make an investment in these communities. We know that this works, and we're going the wrong way. I would also add, Mr. President, that when Senator Champion and I negotiated, it was general fund money. And that money has now been pushed into workforce investment and other programs, which are then putting the pressure on the folks that were getting money from there. So we're not only going backwards in terms of what we do, but we're also consolidating that into a fund that has a lot of pressure. Mr. President, Senator Pratt, I will say that there are some key organizations that I know that you had considered that we think are doing phenomenal work. The Metropolitan Economic Development Association, otherwise known as MEDA, is a world-renowned, internationally and nationally known organization that is taking small businesses and turning them into mid-sized businesses that are creating jobs throughout this state. The Neighborhood Development Center. Many of you, if you've eaten on Payne Avenue, University, Lake Street, in my district, the Global Market, more than likely you've eaten at a place that or shopped at a place that the Neighborhood Development Center has helped to get off the ground from nothing. Someone had an idea, had an inkling in their eye, went to the Neighborhood Development Center, developed the process, helped to get the financing, and now they're in business and they're moving forward and paying taxes. The YWCA of Minneapolis works awfully hard at workforce development. One of the things that will come up tomorrow is early childhood or the CCAP program and the issues there around how do we deal with integrity within that program. Well, one of the things that the YWCA is they train people to be early childhood associates. So they actually get in the business with the training that they need, amongst other things that they do. We also don't see anything in our Somali and Latino community. These are the emerging communities that everybody talks about as we get browner and grayer. They are a workforce of tomorrow, and we are not investing in them to be able to have the resources in which they can fill the jobs that, once again, the CEOs say that they need. So, Mr. President and Senator Pratt, though, once again, I start out saying thankful that at least it's there, it's woefully underfunded. The mechanisms in which we are moving it is making communities compete against each other, right? We are not doing the work that we need to do. This is an opportunity to grow our economy. This is an opportunity to fulfill what business, private industry, the marketplace is telling us that they need. This is an opportunity for us to do it. And unfortunately, Mr. President and Senator Pratt, we are going the wrong way. And what I would hope is that we rethink this. I think the House has it better. I don't know if I'm totally think they got it right, and I think the governor has it better, but I think we need to rethink this. Hopefully, as this bill leaves here, it can get amended to be better and go to conference and come back with a higher investment. And then hopefully we can start to track and do the necessary work Senator Pratt, I appreciate the hearing that you had one evening that I stopped by with that, but I think that we could do even more to get out and visit these organizations, get out on the road, get to Wilmer and get to St. Cloud and get up to Fargo and all the places, get on the White Earth Reservation and all Pine County. When we did this work, we did it all across the state, Rochester. We can do better by investing in our communities. Thank you, Mr. President.